My nephews just want to be so annoying to me. Part 8, I think. Ambush. When morning came, the high priest had an audience with Baron Blonde, where he would give him one of the smaller chalices. That was all we needed to do for farming towns under the rule of nobles. In the past, when the temple had an excess of priests and shrine maidens, they were also sent to the farming towns and nobles. But the current mana shortage was so limiting that this was no longer the case, especially given that they had less mana lent mana to other duchies as well. Apparently, we only had to directly deliver the blessings of the large chalice to the chiefs of towns that gathered in collective winter homes in the central district. That is, the land within the duchy ruled directly by the Archduke and no other noble. The ruling nobles elsewhere could activate the smaller chalices themselves. If all nobles had mana and could fill up the smaller chalices, what was the point in the temple performing some excessively grand dedication ritual and then delivering the filled up chalices to them? Even assuming there was some reason they were unable to fill them up themselves, why not just hand them out before the nobles returned to their provinces to save ourselves the effort of having to deliver them? It didn't make sense. I acted like I understood, but on the inside I really didn't. In the end, I just nodded and kept that to myself, figuring that there was probably an explanation behind why they did tedious work for apparently no reason. I mean, you could ask the high priest that later in the hidden room if you wanted to really know. Once the high priest finished his meeting with Baron Blonde, we spent the rest of the day flying around the grain-producing region of the central district where the largest farming villages were. Then, after performing the spring prayer at 5 commoner winter mansions, we once again went to a farming town ruled by a noble and stayed the night. When morning came, the high priest had an audience with the noble and handed over another chalice. We went through the same spring prayer process the next day and the day after that. Then we were done with the farming towns in the district. Starting tomorrow, we will only be visiting the mansions of nobles, the high priest said with a somewhat grim expression. We generally traveled on high beasts while going through noble territory, but for some reason that was beyond me fathoming, we would occasionally travel only by carriage. And when we were on our way to some noble mansions, we got into carriages a short distance away from the mansion to act as though we had been traveling by carriage the entire time. In these cases, the high priest told me to hide my face under the kind of veil worn by noble daughters, and when the bumpy carriage arrived at the mansion, only I, the high priest, Fran, and Arno would go inside. Sylvester and the knights would stay behind in the carriages. I was worried that Sylvester would cause a fuss since he was always so eager for attention, but he would always wait in the carriage without protest. Viscount Gerlach's mansion is our next destination, and we shall arrive by carriage. Let us be off, said the high priest, as we rode atop our high beasts. It was early in the morning, and he had just delivered a chalice to a certain noble, and we were now speeding through the skies to catch up with the carriage that had left it before us. He had explained that the carriages had magic tools within them that allowed the high priest to detect their location from long distances. That's cool. We rendezvoused with the carriages without any issue. We always sat such that Karlstedt and Sylvester were in one carriage, while I was seated in another carriage with Daniel and the high priest. That was apparently the best distribution for defense and offensive purposes. Combat was entirely out of my wheelhouse, so I just took their word for it. Viscount Gerlach expressed great interest in you, mine. He has specifically asked for you to visit his land during the spring prayer. But know that he is quite close with the high bishop. You would do well to be on guard around him. The high priest seemed to be pretty on edge as he instructed me to pull the veil down to cover even more of my face than usual. We were summoned to see Viscount Gerlach as soon as we arrived, and so the high priest, Arno, Fran, and I made our way to the mansion, leaving the carriages behind us. Ah, good brother Ferdinand, thank you for traveling so long a way to see me. Is this the apprentice shrine maiden after so many rumors about? Perhaps due to confirmation bias, the man's voice sounded sticky and nasty to me. I couldn't see his face at all since I was kneeling, and the veil was still covering my face. The most I could see out of the corner of my eye was the bottom of his legs, but all that told me was that he seemed a little plump. You'll be staying the night, yes? He continued. I welcome you readily. Unfortunately, we are pressed for time, and will be leaving immediately. We shall be staying at Count Liesgang's residence tonight. The high priest handed over the chalice, then cut the conversation short and left immediately. He had handled the entire process from start to finish, so it all ended without me even seeing Gerlach's face. We departed from Gerlach's mansion before noon, but it wasn't until later that evening that we arrived at the summer mansion of Count Liesgang in the neighboring province. I had been traveling by high beasts so frequently I hadn't quite realized just how slow the carriages were by comparison. The high priest said we were traveling by carriage because he didn't want us to arrive before our attendants had finished preparing our rooms. But judging by the way he kept looking behind us, I figured there was another reason. Apparently Count Liesgang's province was larger than any other nobles in the duchy, but the building set aside for the priests who only visited twice a year was as small as we had grown accustomed to. and I slept in a room for servants once again. The high priest had me drink one of his concocted potions for fear of what effect my exhaustion might have on my health, and, as a result, I slept soundly until morning and woke up feeling great. On that refreshing morning, the high priest immediately called me to his room and passed over a sound-muting magic tool. Brigands entered Cardstad's room late last night, he said, but I was the only one who tilted their head in confusion. Everyone else wore grim expressions, seeming to suggest they knew already. Brigands, like thieves or something? No, they were kidnappers looking for you, explained Cardstad. It was 2 men. They tried to leave the second. They saw that the bump in the bed was too big to be you. I jumped out of bed on the spot and tried to capture them, but Cardstad trailed off and looked at me like it was hard for him to say what happened next. Did they get away from you? No, I caught one and left him to Lord Ferdinand, then tailed after the other from a distance, thinking I would glean what information I could. There were horses in the forest east of the mansion, and he raced away on one. I summoned my high beast and went to pursue him, but the second I did, he exploded along with his horse. What? My mind rejected the last part of his sentence, not wanting to understand it. He exploded along with his horse. It just didn't make sense. Sylvester, seeing that I had frozen in place, continued, and the man Cardstad caught killed himself while Ferdinand was disarming him. When the one who got away died from an explosion, everything was over. I thought about not informing you, but as you are their target, I decided it would be best that you are aware of the situation, said the high priest. Given that they know where you were staying, we can conclude that Viscount Gerlach is behind this. He had declared the culprit flat out in such an authoritative tone, I slowly looked around at all those gathered, holding a hand against my chest as if to contain the fear and anxiety coursing through me. Is there no chance that Count Lysengang is the culprit, I asked, but Cardstad shot the idea down with a firm shake of his head. No chance at all. They are family on my mother's side. They would never bring harm to anyone accompanying me. We finished a hard-to-eat breakfast, then departed from Lysgang's mansion. Our next night will be spent in the province at the very southern end of the duchy. We sent our carriages in that direction, then spent the morning and afternoon visiting one noble mansion after another. Now let us rejoin with the carriages. We finished our business with no problem at all, and the high priest turned his high beast to the road so that we could catch up to our carriages heading for the duchy's southern tip. After a minute of flying, a red beam of light shot directly up in the sky. Everyone's expressions changed. That was the red light the Knight's Order used to call for aid. Ambush! Roared Cardstad, speeding on his high beast in an instant. His griffin shot straight for where the red light had come from. Follow us, yelled the high priest as he soared past us on his lion. Panicking at the thought of being left behind, I turned to look at Daniel with my hands on the reins. Sir Daniel, we must hurry as well. I don't have the amount of mana needed to go that fast. Then use mine. I tightened my grip on the reins, desperate to get going, and immediately felt my mana flow out of me. The winged horse speed shot right up. Thanks. The road weaved between a forest and rolling plains, and after a moment I could see a group of carriages at the edge of my vision. Inside were Fran, Rosina, Hugo, and Ella, but the carriages were surrounded by some strange black mist. What's that black stuff? I called out to Daniel. We had finally caught up to the others, but we were moving so fast that they probably couldn't hear me. That's a god of darkness barrier. It drains mana, so magic-based attacks do nothing to it. The fact that the ambushing forests can make something like that means they must have nobles with them. Attacking it all will be hard until we figure out what kind of mana we're dealing with, said Daniel, his voice worryingly tense. It was then that about 100 weapon-wielding people, farmers maybe, surged out of the forest and rushed toward the carriage. The very thought of Fran and the others were in danger made my head go blank, and I had Daniel pull on the reins to bring the high beast I was riding up next to the high priest. High priest, if your magic won't work on the carriage, please use it to knock out those men instead. Wait. Those might be citizens of the duchy, you know. Sylvester protested with a stunned look, but I just gave him the hardest glare I could. These thugs were trying to hurt people I cared about. I didn't care who they were. Fran and Rosina are way more important to me than they are. I just have to pray to the gods to make magic happen, right? I thought about which god I should pray to as I started to unleash the mana pent up inside of me. It flowed through and started to fill my body, making my ring and bracelet shine. Ferdinand, Sylvester roared. Stop her before it's too late. Nothing can stop her now, the high priest shot back. Nothing? We have no idea how many will die if she launches an attack with that much mana. It'd be a declaration of war if her attack crosses the duchy border. At the very least, buy me enough time to strengthen the border barrier. That should be a clue as to who Sylvester is, but I don't know if that was put in the... Was that put in the anime? I don't know. She cannot be stopped, but we can influence the direction of her rampage. The high priest said quietly. He brought his lion close to our winged horse and looked to me. Mind, if you wish to protect Fran and the others, pray to the wind. Since I hadn't yet decided on a god to pray to, the image of Wilma's goddess of wind sprung to mind, accompanied by the research I had done myself. Shitzaria, the goddess of wind, was the goddess of autumn. Once the goddess of spring was dispersed, it was she who protected her little sister, the goddess of earth, as the god of life regained his strength. She held back the god of life and his ice and snow with her shield of wind until the harvest was over. Unlike the goddess of water, who washed away the snow and ice that imprisoned the goddess of earth, she could be called a goddess specialized in defense and protection. She was the perfect one for me to pray to right now. I glared at the line of carriages covered in black mist, then inhaled deeply. I'll protect Fran and the others no matter what. O goddess of wind, Shitzaria, protector of all. O 12 goddesses who serve by her side. I began my prayer by saying her name and could instantly feel the mana swelling within me take shape. Power meant to protect what's important to me, not attack my foes. Flowed from my entire body to my left arm, where it began to stir like a whirlpool. Mine, form the shield over the god of darkness's barrier, so that your mana isn't consumed, warned the high priest. I gave a small nod, while keeping my eyes on the mist beneath me. Thanks to the prayers I had been forced to memorize for rituals, the words flowed easily out of my mouth. Please hear my prayer and lend me your divine strength. Grant me your shield of wind, so that I might blow away those who mean to cause ill. The yellow face stone on the bracelet the high priest had given me shone the brightest, for it was the divine color of Shitzaria, the goddess of wind. My mana surged, turning into dazzling bright light and shooting straight for the carriage. I imagined a large dome covering the black barrier, but not touching it, as suggested by the high priest, and the mana moved according to my thoughts like paint on a brush. A sharp metallic sound filled the air, and the round dome was complete. From above, it looked like the carriages and black mist were trapped within a divine shield carved into clear amber. Yeah. The armed men continued pressing forward, perhaps not noticing the new barrier, or perhaps being too caught up in their charge to stop. The ones at the front were the first to hit the barrier. They were immediately knocked back by strong winds, sending them all flying. What was that? Some had been thrown back several meters, others had fallen backwards and sent the people behind them toppling over like dominoes. They looked at the shield of wind in confusion, having no idea what had just happened. It's magnificent, said Karstedt with somewhat widened eyes as he watched from above. His opinion of the shield protecting Fran and Rosina matched mine entirely. Right. You think so too, Lord Karstedt? I would expect nothing less from Shitzaria, the goddess of wind's shield. Praise be to the goddess who protected Fran and Rosina. That's enough praying from you, Sylvester yelled angrily, the second I threw up my hands in excitement over the shield, which was much more powerful than I had anticipated. But wasn't it important to pray and thank the gods after they had lent me their power? I kept that thought to myself and peered down to see the armed men charge the shield once more. They were blown away by the strong winds once again, knocking over the people behind them as they flew back. It took a few more charges before they finally stopped trying. I just sensed mana in the forest, said Daniel, sending everyone looking his way. His sensing mana meant that someone had tried to use it to interfere with the wind shield, or to otherwise protect someone from the rampaging winds. I had been told that it was hard for those with a lot of mana to detect amounts much smaller than their own. Daniel, as a lay noble, could sense it, but nobody else felt any mana being used in the forest. Everyone's expression hardened, and the high priest gave his orders while looking at us one by one. Sylvester Karstedt and I will go search for the forest. Daniel, you stay here in the air and protect mine. Yes, sir. Daniel gave a firm nod, but Sylvester yelled no and shook his head. Daniel, come here a little, said Sylvester, before suddenly standing up on the high priest's lion. Then so nimbly it seemed almost unnatural. He leaped toward our winged horse's widely stretched out wings. What are you doing? That's dangerous. Perhaps due to being made out of stone, the winged horse didn't shake or falter at all from Sylvester landing on its wing. He walked this way at a speedy pace, keeping his arms stretched out to maintain balance. You're in the way, exclaimed Sylvester as he stuck his hands under my armpits, raising me up high and swinging me side to side. I had no idea what was happening. As the world shook around me, all I could do was blink. He then yelled, Ferdinand, catch! And before I knew it, he had thrown me at the height of one of his swings into the empty air, that is, I've been thrown into the air with no time to prepare myself. I just stared at the sky in front of me, unblinking. There was no point in me reaching out my arms, since there was nothing for me to grab onto. All I could see was the big blue sky stretching in every direction. Apprentice! In slow motion, I saw Daniel stretching out his hands for me, seeming just as shocked as I was, while Sylvester jumped over his head to sit behind him. For an instant after being thrown, I floated in the air, but gravity soon got its grip on me, and I started to fall. My hair slapped my face as the wind rushed around my body, and the sudden pain knocked me back to my senses. I gasped, realizing I had been thrown on a cordless bungee jump without any concern for my safety or emotional well-being. Oh God, I screamed too! There we go. The high priest moved his high beast and caught me, having predicted from Sylvester's throw where I would fall. I probably hadn't fallen more than a meter, but it felt like 100 to me. Being thrown into the empty air with no way of saving myself had been so scary that I instinctively clung to the high priest for protection. But even though he had caught me, my body still trembled helplessly in fear. That was terrifying. I would imagine so. The high priest patted my back comfortingly as I clung to him, but having the source of my terror, Sylvester, speak again sent my body trembling. Ferdinand, you stay here. Wherever whoever's in the forest might be a decoy. Very well. The border is close. We'll catch them before they can escape. Come, Karstad. Sir. Karstad gave a short response, and they both flew to the forest on their high beasts. The high priest spoke in a quiet voice while watching them go. What he did was reckless, but it was a decision founded in logic, prioritizing your safety. Forgive him for me. What? Those in the forest do not have much more mana than Daniel. It is ideal for him to be there to detect their location. Furthermore, if the casters there are indeed a decoy, it would be dangerous to leave you and Daniel on your own. The high priest scanned our surroundings without letting his guard down for a moment. I could tell that I really was in danger, and now wasn't the time for me to be quivering in fear. Mine, could you pray with me for their success in battle? The high priest pointed out something we could do while staying protected in the air, and I responded with a small nod. Doing something to help would distract me from how scared I was. Once the high priest taught me the words to the prayer, we chanted together. O God of war, Arngriff, of the God of fire, Laden Shaft's exalted 12, we pray that you grant them your divine protection. The bracelets the high priest and I were wearing shone with blue light, beams of which shot from the blue face stones on them. They spiraled around each other, shooting toward where the others had gone. Sylvester swung his shining wand over the forest and sent a large red bird flying away from him. I watched on, thinking it looked a lot like a phoenix, and saw it spread its wings wide before seemingly melting into the air. A transparent red wall seemed to appear from where the bird had spread its wings. Then a yellow, equally large bird shot out of his wand as well, spinning in the air while crumbling and sending shining powder raining down beneath it. Karstad had turned his shining wand into a two-handed broadsword. At the same time, the red bird had become a wall. The massive blade shone like a rainbow, and he swung it while roaring a battle cry. Dazzling light blasted out of his sword and shot right down into the forest. What? An impossibly loud, ear-shattering sound shook the air as if a meteor had crashed into the earth, a feeling only strengthened by the ground shaking like an earthquake. The explosion that happened in the next instant destroyed an entire part of the forest, and I felt the amount of mana within me plummet, perhaps due to shielding the carriage from the force of the blast. That was too much, murmured the high priest, knocking me back to my senses. I looked up at him. Are the carriages okay? They seem to be entirely unharmed thanks to the dual barriers of darkness and wind. Phew, I sighed in relief at having protected the carriage, but my anxiety was quickly replaced by a heavy dizziness, and I had to grab the high priest's chest to stop myself from falling. Is something wrong, mine? The moment I learned everyone was safe, all my strength left me, and I'm a little cold. When I told him that I was weakening and feeling cold, the high priest looked at me with confusion and placed a hand on my neck. You are fairly cold now. Did you perhaps use too much mana? Huh? Oh, maybe. Now that I thought about it, I had felt something similar to this after performing my first offering. Back then I had been able to recover by letting the mana within me flow through my body a little. I tried to do that again, but it seemed I had used almost all my mana, making the wind shield on top of performing all those spring prayer rituals. Up until now, I had always been forcing my excess mana into a box within me. That was just my first time just straight up not having enough. I had no idea what to do. High priest, I don't have any mana left. I don't have enough to circulate through my body, I explained, which made the high priest double take with a look of disbelief in his eyes. You? Out of mana? The only potions I have that could help with something like that severe are in the carriages. We cannot retrieve them until we can confirm it is safe. For now, drink this. It is something of a last resort, but it's better than nothing. The high priest took out a thin test tube-looking golden decoration out of his belt, and pressed a small round stone on it. The top of the test tube opened up. He handed it to me, and a quick sniff revealed that the awful-tasting medicine wasn't inside. I gulped it down and found a sweet-tasting liquid spreading through my mouth. Thinking back, it tasted a lot like the potion he had made me drink before using the memory-searching tool. That stuff was a bit thicker, but they tasted largely the same, and they both made me sleepy, too. Close your eyes and let sleep take you. When you wake up, it'll be time for a lecture and the potion you hate so much. I bobbed my head and I nodded and shut my eyes. Sister mine, have you awoken? Rosina? I woke up to see Rosina peering at my face as if watching to make sure I had slept well. Upon noticing her, I slowly sat up in bed only for my head to immediately spin as though I'd lost a lot of blood. I let my head fall back under my pillow. You mustn't move so suddenly. You pushed yourself dangerously far to protect the carriages from harm, correct? The high priest was quite exasperated with you. I am well prepared for whatever lecture he intends to give, so be warned about it before. As he warned me about it before I lost consciousness. More importantly, are you okay, Rosina? Is everyone else okay? Were any of you harmed or put through any suffering? I wondered whether I had done my job and successfully protected everyone. I didn't even want to consider that I might have ended up using all my mana and collapsing for no reason, and was about to suffer through a lecture and a disgusting potion for nothing. It'd just be sad. Everyone is quite alright. Nobody was harmed and nothing was damaged or stolen. Really? That's such a relief. I sat back in bed and listened as Rosina explained what had happened in the carriages. The carriages were forced to a sudden stop when black darkness enveloped them. Everyone inside looked out the windows and were shocked when they saw armed farmers appearing out of the forest. They readied themselves for the assault, only for the attackers to be knocked back by something. Then a sudden light pierced the air, and they heard yells and a massive explosion. But since not even a rush of air touched the carriage, they had no idea what had happened. It was only when the high priest and the others arrived afterward they learned they were saved. You suffered the most, sister mine. Only you fell unconscious and went cold to the touch. You wouldn't stop trembling, explained Rosina as my consciousness faded for the second time. In general, when farmers are weighed up against grey priests, it's the ones who produce food and pay taxes who come out on top. We were only saved because of you, sister mine. I thank you ever so much. The next time I woke up, the high priest brought me the disgusting potion to drink. He held out the small bottle containing a familiar green liquid toward me. Drink this. Ugh. I tried to pull away, but as I was stuck in bed, there wasn't anywhere I could go. The high priest gave me a sharp glare for recoiling from the potion, despite knowing I had no choice but to drink it. Has any of your mana returned yet? Not yet. I figured as much, but we cannot stay here forever. Do you need me to pinch your nose and force you to drink it? We couldn't leave until my mana had recovered, and if my lack of mana was making me a burden on everyone, then I really did have no choice but to drink the potion, no matter how disgusting and nasty it was. I took the potion from the high priest's outstretched hand and drank it, my hands trembling and shaking in terror. Ugh. I arrived on the bed clasping my hands over my mouth as tears formed in my eyes from how awful it tasted. The high priest looked down at me and nodded with satisfaction. Continue holding your mouth shut and listen until the potion takes effect, he began. Before going on to explain the shocking truth that they had absolutely no idea who set up the God of Darkness barrier or organized the attack. As unbelievable as it sounded, Karstad's attack had reduced the enemy to nothing but dust, leaving them with no avenue to probe deeper. They couldn't even be sure that Gerlach was involved. All they did know was that there were two of them, and that as Damiel had been able to sense them, whoever launched the attack didn't have much mana. They weren't strong enough to make a darkness barrier themselves, meaning they must have had nobles helping them, and they predicted that it was likely a noble from another duchy. How do you know that? More than half of those who attacked the carriages were not citizens of our own duchy. He couldn't tell me how they could identify their citizenship, but regardless, the darkness barrier had likely been put in place by a noble from another duchy who had fled back across the border to his own duchy before Karstad unleashed his attack. Wasn't he trying to capture the culprits? It seemed that he attacked with his normal strength, but the blast ended up stronger than he expected. Karstad himself was more surprised with the force of the attack than anyone. The high priest glanced away uncomfortably, which was enough for me to guess what had been the problem. Were our prayers unnecessary? Perhaps. Do not speak of them unless asked to do so. Okay. He then told me that Sylvester and Karstad had already returned to the city. They had returned via High Beast since this incident needed to be reported and processed for immediate investigation. It's usually unthinkable for carriages carrying priests to be attacked, right? So they need to report this to the Archduke and have him investigate? More or less. The high priest nodded, then hardened his expression. He looked down at me with cold eyes as I wiggled into a better sitting position. Mine, do you truly wish to stay with your family? Of course I do. Then why did you allow yourself to lose control of your mana yet again, he asked, and I gasped with realization. I was just so worried about Fran and Rosina, I wasn't thinking. Well, you consider Fran and Rosina your family most likely at this point. So, of course, they're going to be on the same level as keeping your family safe. The situation ended without incident because you focused your rampaging mana on making a powerful shield, but you still marked yourself as a dangerous threat once again. And above all else, although you ended up fine, that was only because you had a magic tool, prayed to the gods, and activated a spell. Had you not done all of those, your uncontrolled mana would have killed you. In general, magic tools were necessary for releasing one's mana. That was the reason why devouring children without magic tools died, as their mana grew along with them and ate them alive. I had survived by offering mana in the temple, but had no idea whether my body would last if I forgot myself and let my mana go on a rampage. Do you know exactly what happened to those who died from losing control of their mana? The high priest went on to explain in excessively precise detail exactly how nobles who let their mana go on a rampage died. The scariest part was his dry tone. First, the mana begins to leak from their bodies until eventually it all bursts out at once. At that point, their body can no longer endure as a vessel for mana. Their skin begins to swell and bubble, indeed, quite similar to how boiling water might bubble. But it is when the skin can no longer hold back the mana that it all bursts, sending... I don't need to see it. I don't need to read. No. I can't hear you. I don't want to hear you. No. I clapped my hands over my ears and threw the blanket over my head, but the high priest ripped it away and pulled my hands off my ears. Contain yourself, mine. I have not finished. I'm sorry. I won't ever do it again. I'll never lose control of my mana again, so please forgive me. I don't want to bubble. I don't want to explode. Stop. I prostrated myself on the bed, sobbing tears of genuine terror. The high priest gave a light nod. Very well, then. The next time you lose control of your mana, I shall tie you to a chair such that you cannot cover your ears or escape, then have you listen to every word as I finish my explanation. Envisioning myself tied to a chair and being forced to listen to terrifying explanation after terrifying explanation, I shook my head hard and desperately tried to make those thoughts go away. It won't happen again, I promise. The sincerity in my tone made the high priest flash a smile. I think I'll be able to use this elsewhere, he murmured, sending a frightened chill down my spine. Oh, mine. Poor mine. The wild and uncontrollable blue priest. Once I had recovered, the spring prayer continued with us visiting the remaining noble mansions. Nothing particularly out of the ordinary occurred, and we all got back to the temple safely. Welcome back, sister mine, said Wilma with a warm smile. I see you didn't mess up or anything, Delia added. Thank you both for watching my chamber while I was gone. How is everyone? Delia and Wilma welcomed me as I returned to my chambers, and a sense of relief washed over me. I felt as though I was back to where I was meant to be. Fran and Gil began unloading the luggage packed in the carriages while I changed from my noble traveling clothes to my normal shrine maiden robes. With Delia's assistance, of course. I'll get a bath ready for you once the water heats up. Thank you, Delia. Delia, Wilma, and Rosina were all working hard to unpack and organize the luggage being brought in, but it was piling up much faster than they could unpack it. My chambers were quickly becoming just as messy as they had been before I left. Sister mine, my sincerest apologies, but the high priest is calling for you on urgent business. It seems to be about you returning home, said Fran, a tinge of worry in his voice. He had taken a momentary break from moving luggage, and Power walked up the stairs to where I was. I had been worrying about when I would finally be able to go home now that spring prayer was over. So hearing that the high priest wanted to talk to me about exactly that made me jump from my chair in joy. Hard at once. Rosina, please accompany sister mine. I must continue unloading her luggage. On the way down, I saw Fran and Hugo carrying luggage together, having seemingly gotten closer over the journey. Ella, perhaps due to her experience carrying heavy pots as a chef, had strong arms and could easily manage even my heavy bags. Gil was surprisingly strong for his size, too, maybe thanks to him eating more food and doing manual labor in the workshop and forest. I shall be departing for the high priest's room, I announced. I leave my chambers in your care, everyone. Outside the entrance to the noble section of the temple, a line of carriages was still being unloaded. The gray priests in the workshop were helping too, and I saw a familiar face from the workshop walking by, holding a large box. I have returned. How fares the orphanage? I asked, and after blinking in surprise, the gray priest gave a small smile. Welcome back, sister mine. The children have grown much. They will be overjoyed to see you at the orphanage again. I'll be overjoyed as well. The gray priest moved to the side to give me space. I nodded my thanks to them and walked quickly as to minimize my interruption of their work. High priest, wait, Brother Sylvester? There you are, mine. Sylvester was lounging about in the high priest's room like he owned the place, lying on the bench and munching on the fruit placed on the table for visitors. Meanwhile, the high priest was completely ignoring him, giving instructions to the gray priest who were carrying his luggage. High priest, I was told you called for me, I said. The high priest turned around a thoroughly exhausted expression on his face and asked me to sit down. I nodded and followed him over to the table. The moment I sat down, Sylvester leaned forward toward me. I'm the one who called for you. I want to take a look around, and you seem like just the girl for the job, mine. Be my guide. What in the world do you mean by that? I looked up at the high priest for an explanation, but before he could reply, Sylvester answered in exasperation. What else is a guide going to do but guide me? First to the orphanage, then your workshop. I also need to take a look at the forest the orphans are going to, he said casually. I reflexively tensed up. Not a single blue priest had shown any interest in the orphanage or the workshop before now. Even the high priest had only ever heard about them through reports, having never actually visited the places himself. Furthermore, Sylvester had appeared from nowhere, and I had no idea what he was thinking. I subconsciously clutched on the... When were you holding on to him? I subconsciously clutched onto the high priest's robe. You may calm yourself, mine. I will be coming to the orphanage and workshop as well. I have long thought it would be wise to see the changes you've made myself. I put a hand against my chest in relief. Sylvester probably wouldn't cause too much trouble with the high priest holding his reins. As for the forest, however, the high priest continued, the forest in the noble's quarter should suffice for you. He glared at Sylvester as he spoke, the exhaustion from our journey clear on his face. Nah, I'm going to the forest. I'm going to check out her restaurant, too. Sylvester continued to list each place he intended to visit. The restaurant is not finished, I believe. I mentioned that the chefs are still in training. But more importantly, High Priest, are blue priests even allowed to go to the lower city's forest? I would assume so. They can. There's nothing really stopping them. Going directly to the Italian restaurant in a carriage was one thing, but I had never before heard of any blue priest going to the lower city's forest. There was a forest by the nobles' quarter that only nobles were allowed to enter. It had overseers, and any commoner wandering in from outside the city would be killed with impunity. Oh, I feel bad for them. If Sylvester wanted to go to a forest, he could just go to the nobles' forest like the high priest said. I'm interested in seeing what a commoner's forest is like. It'll be fine. Most people in the lower city won't even recognize us as nobles. And I can protect myself from anyone who does, no problem. Sylvester then slapped his flexed biceps, wearing a confident grin. I could tell he was enthusiastic, but letting him do what he wanted would definitely backfire on us. High Priest, I'm counting on you to hold him back. I silently pinned all my hopes on the High Priest, but he just looked at me while rubbing his temple as if containing a headache. Fine, do as you wish, mine. All I ask is that you report exactly what he does. In sharp contrast to Sylvester's seemingly boundless energy, the High Priest was exhausted, looking like he didn't want to think about anything anymore. I looked between the two of them, confused. Before I knew it, I had been assigned to be Sylvester's guide. I felt like babysitter would be a more accurate way to describe it, really. You two may leave. The High Priest wanted us gone, but I tightened my grip on his sleeve. Why had I come here, if not to hear about going home? It certainly wasn't to have guide duty forced on me. High Priest, I was told you wanted to talk about me going home. When may I leave the temple? The High Priest's eyes wavered before he looked down at me. Yes, well... You only recently expended an enormous amount of money. Your family would have no means of helping you if you were to collapse. Rest here for 3 days, and if you haven't fallen ill by the 4th day, then you may leave that morning. Inform your family of this. Also, do us all a favor by resting well today. Okay, I gave an enthusiastic response before moving to leave the room with Rosina. For some reason, Sylvester stood up too, along with the Grey Priest behind him who was probably an attendant. Alright, let's get going, mine. Brother Sylvester, come to my room. But I must rest. I looked back to the High Priest for help, but he simply shrugged and jutted his chin toward the door, gesturing for us to leave. Sylvester happily obliged. I had no escape. After sharing a defeated look with Rosina, I followed after him. Come on, it's this one. It seemed that Sylvester's room was right next to the High Priest's. He opened the door for me, and I found the inside was almost entirely barren. It felt odd that his room had only the bare minimum of furniture. I would have thought that an overgrown elementary schooler like Sylvester would have his room packed with stuff relating to his hobbies and tastes. Fine, I know you're taking the orphanage kids to the forest. Take me too if you don't want me to tell the High Bishop about everything. Sylvester wore a cocky grin as he attempted to blackmail me. Everyone in the temple knew that the High Bishop hated me, which was why no blue priest up until now had ever approached me. I furrowed my brow, not understanding what Sylvester was thinking. Why do you want to go to the forest anyway? To hunt. I blinked in surprise at his answer. To hunt? Where have you been hunting before now? I still couldn't see why he would want to go to the lower city's forest. And the nobles' quarters forest as well. Then you can continue going there. That place is way too boring, Sylvester sighed before going on to list every single problem he had with the nobles' forest. Not only did you need to have your hunt approved by the overseer ahead of time, you were only allowed in at a pre-assigned time. It wasn't somewhere you could just wander into when the mood struck. Furthermore, there was a sizable hunting competition held there every year. Everyone's position was defined by their status in the noble hierarchy, and you had to hunt while making sure not to overstep the bounds of your strata. It was more of a place for nobles to flatter and butter up the archduke than to do any actual hunting. Overall, the nobles' forest did sound like too rigid of a place for someone like Sylvester, a man with the heart of a little boy who wanted a genuine test of skill, honest praise, and a place he could run off to with his bow whenever he felt like hunting. I understand now, but you can hardly get to the lower city's forest in clothes that clean. Bring me some dirty clothes from the lower city, then. I don't know how many people you intend to go with, but do you plan to make them all wear dirty clothes as well? It would be easy enough for me to buy cheap clothes in a second-hand store for them, but I had no idea how many sets of clothes he would need. However, my question just made Sylvester look confused. What are you talking about? I'm asking how many people you will be going with. Nobody. The temple's one thing, but I don't need any attendance in the lower city. I looked between Sylvester and the Grey Priest attendant who was preparing tea for us. Does the High Priest know about this? Why would I need Ferdinand's permission? You might be a commoner he took custody of, but I don't need anybody's permission. That's kind of also a given on who he is. He punctuated his declaration with a firm, anyone should know that. I hung my head. Of course, an adult blue priest wouldn't need to get permission from the High Priest for everything they did. That said, I did feel as though a person like Sylvester would need someone to constantly watch over them just as much as I did. Anyway, we'll go to the orphanage and workshop first. We'll do that the day after tomorrow. Brother Sylvester, are you going to the orphanage to search for a shrine maiden to take flowers from? I asked, unable to think of another reason why a blue priest would want to go to the orphanage. Sylvester grimaced, his brows pushed together with disgust. Mine, kids like you shouldn't talk about that kind of thing. Want to start chirping pooey again? No, it's just, I'm the orphanage director, so... I had considered stealthily hiding the shrine maidens old enough to offer flowers if Sylvester intended to seek them out. But judging by his reaction, it was hard to think that was his aim. That's all I needed to know. Do you think I'm so starved for women that I need to search the orphanage for one? I thought that was a normal thing for blue priests to do. I had always assumed that they settled for the nearby Grey Shrine Maidens because they so rarely left the temple. Maybe I was wrong. I tilted my head curiously. Sylvester bit his lip for a second, then coughed. Men of my charisma and charm can find women in the nobles' quarter, too. I'm sure. If it meant he wasn't going to go after the Shrine Maidens in the temple, I really didn't mind Sylvester bragging about how easily he could find girls in the nobles' quarter. I promised to find him some second-hand clothes and exited the room with Rosina. Once I returned to my chambers, I called out to all my attendants as they put away my luggage, gathering them together. I needed to tell everyone about Sylvester and the High Priest's plans. The day after tomorrow, the High Priest and a Blue Priest will be visiting the orphanage and the workshop. The day after tomorrow? They exclaimed in unison. Everyone looked very understandably surprised, aside from Delia, who didn't go to either place. That was simply too sudden for the plans of a noble, as usually thorough preparation would be made and a warning given long in advance. But given that Sylvester had spoken the date himself, it would be safe to assume that it was set in stone. Please ensure that the orphanage and workshop are thoroughly cleaned. As for everything else, you may proceed as usual. We weren't doing anything in the workshop we didn't want other people to see. Not to mention that, knowing myself, trying to hide things would never end well. I might as well just be open from the start. Sister mine, does a blue priest visiting mean that... Wilma trailed off, her face pale. I gently shook my head. Don't worry, Wilma. Neither of them will demand an offering of flowers. They just want to see the workshop and the changed orphanage. I see. Wilma nodded but looked no less anxious. In fact, she was now trembling. I felt awful for her, but Sylvester's mind had been made up. There would be no avoiding his visits to the orphanage. As much as I would like to say that you may stay in your room, as you have been entrusted with running the orphanage, you may be needed to answer any questions they may have. Understood. Wilma tightly laced her fingers in front of her chest, squeezing them together. I was disappointed in myself for not being able to do anything but watch her tremble. Gil, is Let's early on in the workshop? If so, please call them over. It would be wise to inform the Gilberta Company of this visit. They're both there. I'll go see whether either of them are free, said Gil before turning around and leaving. I moved to the hall on the first floor so that Let's Orlean could join us while my other attendants started moving the empty boxes strewn about to the nearby male attendant room, freeing up space and making the place look more presentable. Hiya, mine. Good to see you back. Let's, it's been so long. I ran up and gave Let's a hug. I've been away from him longer than ever thanks to the spring prayer. So much happened I don't even know where to start, I confessed. I continued, I'm exhausted. Sounds rough, said Let's, but before I could go on, a displeased voice sounded from behind him. Can you leave that for later and explain why you called me over too? Oh, you're here too, Leon. I've been here from the start. Leon, you are a bit of a jerk. Leon was a Gilberta Company Laharo who had been trained as a waiter by Fran over the winter. He was about to come of age, but since he was a little short, he kind of came across like a younger kid trying to talk big for his age. And while there was no doubting his competence when it came to work, given that Benno had signed a Laharo contract with him, he always got harsh whenever I tried healing my soul with Let's, so I didn't have the greatest opinion of him. I don't have anything to talk to you about, Leon. Feel free to leave. Let's patted my head. Mine, relax. I'm guessing it's something related important to do with the Gilberta Company. I nodded and looked up at Leon, still clinging onto Let's. The day after tomorrow, the High Priest and a Blue Priest will be visiting the orphanage and the workshop. Please tell Benno about this. I'm sure he wants connections with the nobility, and the Blue Priest is interested in the Italian restaurant. Understood. Leon smoothly knelt down and crossed his arms in front of his chest. Despite being prickly whenever I was hugging Lutz, he was dedicated to his work. Okay, good to know. That's all. The Gilberta Company stuff I needed to talk about. The only thing left is a personal request I have for Lutz, I explained. Leon stood up. He shot one annoyed glance at me, clinging to Lutz, and left after saying, I'll go on ahead. What's your request? Well, I've got to rest here for 3 days until I feel better. But the High Priest said I can go home on the 4th day so long as I don't fall sick before then. Could you tell that to Mom and everyone else? Sure, but man, that sure took a while, huh? Murmured Lutz, his voice wavering as he tried to hold back a flood of emotions while he endured my affectionate attack. I had only survived living away from my family for so long because Lutz and Thule had visited me so often, letting me hug them each time. Also, I want a pair of second-hand clothes big enough to fit Deed. They're for a muscular guy who's a bit on the tall side. And who's that? Asked Lutz. It was a natural question. What was so natural that anyone else in the entire world would have probably asked too? But since I had no idea whether it would be wise to answer out loud, I stood on my tippy toes and stretched my back to whisper stealthily into Lutz's ear. The Blue Priest visiting us the day after tomorrow. Lutz made an impossible-to-describe expression, and then after a moment of silence let out a murmur. He's a weirdo, isn't he? Yes, a big weirdo. He said he wants to go to the forest to hunt. Any Blue Priest who wants to hunt in the lower city's forest bad enough to wear dirty second-hand clothes was weird, plain and simple. Lutz grimaced upon realizing that it'd be his job to take that priest to the forest, and honestly, I felt for him. It was a position I wouldn't want to be in either. Well, no point crying over what's done, he sighed. I'll go close hunting tomorrow, so it'll be all ready for when the day comes. Thanks, Lutz. With that conversation settled, Lutz started telling me about the progress that had been made on the printing press and Johann's letter types while I was gone. The mine workshop had revenued making paper as well, so we had more on hand again. I resumed making paper. I want to start printing books again as soon as possible. Do you think the Ink Guild has started making our ink yet? I asked. Even if you had all of them, all of the paper in the world, you couldn't print with that ink. And if we needed to make our own, we'd have to start by gathering soot again. Yes, I heard from Master Bendo that it started hiring craftsmen just to make the plant paper ink. Oh, and there's a new head of the Ink Guild. I know that. The High Priest told me that the previous one died, I said before falling silent and hugging Lutz beside her. There was no way I could tell him that nobles hunting for me had killed him. What's wrong? Nobles are scary. Huh? What are you talking about? Are you talking about the Blue Priest who's coming over tomorrow? Lutz asked, making me laugh. Sylvester was scary, but for reasons completely different from the nobles hunting me. Kinda, since he's a weird noble. It's scary not knowing what he's going to do next. When we first met, he poked my cheek and told me to chirp pooey. The heck? I told Lutz all about the weird things Sylvester had done at our first meeting. Then I talked about the things he had done over spring prayer. Lutz listened while laughing until eventually forming a mischievous grin and poking my cheek. Come on, mind, while I try chirping again. What, you big bully? Pooey. Oh, that's funny. He's now doing it too. Oh boy, you shouldn't have said that, Mine. And now he's going to start doing it. Anyway, I'll get to work on everything and I'll see y'all next time.